The revenue module in CalCATS is pretty complete. It's part of the weights and measures package because we really don't deal with any ag revenue right now. So if I look at the bottom of the weights and measures menu, we'll see the weights and measures revenue features. So I'll start off with hitting the main one. This is what we call our revenue dashboard, and it is a transaction ledger for all of the business locations in your county. And by transaction ledger, what I mean is every time that you charge a business something, there's a transaction that goes into their ledger. And every time they pay you something, there's a transaction that goes in that's linked to whatever the charge was for. And when we built this, we originally had this audited by the state auditors. So there's quite a lot of auditability and user security protections and things built in. So it's really hard to kind of not have a really good trace of exactly what happened to any dollar amount that's gone into the system and been tracked. So what you'll see is things like you can enter an invoice for a company, but you really can't delete it. The delete button actually does an accounting thing called a reversal transaction, which puts an equal and opposite transaction into the ledger so that it cancels out the first one. Anyway, enough said. Let me go look for one. Do you have any Safeways up there? You do, a Ukiah Safeway. Let me see who we've actually run some invoices for. So I'm just going to grab a quick, I just ran a set here. So this will be a preview of something I'll talk about in a little more detail in a second. Thompson Gas. So let's go back to our ledger and look for Thompson Gas.
That's our biggest one. I also did, I made an account today. It's called DS Services, and they have many locations also, as well as Thompson Gas. I'm not yeah, I got Thompson Gas done.
Oh, I see. Locations is 101 Market and Deli. Yep. So, no, don't worry about that. So here is an example of a series of invoices that have been issued for this location. Okay, so the transaction ledger is going to show you invoices that have been issued. It's going to show you payments that have been entered, anything that's gone on at that business location. So normally what you'd expect to see is every year, if they have devices, you're going to see a device registration invoice, and then hopefully shortly after that, you'll see a payment. And then for other businesses, you'll see different kinds of transactions in here. And across the top, there's a list of the transactions that you can do in the system. The first is an invoice. This is a miscellaneous invoice. So let's have a look at that. And the top part of it is, invoice date, fiscal year, due date, invoice number, sort of the standard invoice setup types of things. And then billing information, contact information, delivery address. Are you going to send the invoice to the location? Or are you going to send it to the business owner? Or are you going to send it to someone else, in which case you can type in an address for where the invoice is going. And then down at the bottom is a fairly typical invoice construction table. So I can say add an item. The items I can add are things like taxi missed appointments, or bad check fees, or public records request, or all these different fees that you may or may not charge in your county. And this list is maintainable by you from your configuration screen, so you can add and remove items that you want to appear in this list. And once you've defined what it is you're going to add, so we're going to add one fine for $100. And so now I can create an invoice for $100 to this business location, but I'm going to send it to the owner. And that will add an invoice into our transaction ledger. There we go. I don't know why I'm getting that unexpected error, so I'll just ignore it. So there's that $100 invoice. At the bottom of the ledger, and I guess we're going to put it at the top too, because this can get kind of long, is an invoice balance. So There's something weird going on in the test data right now, but normally you'd see their current balance due here, which obviously every time they have an invoice, the current balance is, some amount of money they owe you, and every time they make a payment, that reduces their current balance due. Okay, so this invoice is for miscellaneous types of things. Then there are some very specific kinds of invoices you can issue. You can issue a reinspection invoice, which is normally, I expect you do not charge for place and service calls. When a service agent repairs a device, you'll go out and reinspect it for them. But sometimes when service agents fail to fix the device, then they have to have you come back out several times to retest it. A lot of counties start charging money for that once it's failed 2 or 3 times. So the reinspection invoice template is designed for you to do that, and it will calculate the reinspection cost based on hours and mileage and so forth. Okay, so that's a second kind of invoice that you can create. And because those are place and service calls, they're obviously something you're going to do, just, I don't want to say totally infrequently, but it's, a few times during a year, you might be sending out reinspection invoices. Then we have a non-commercial invoice, which is if you're doing a device inspection or certification, for a non-commercial device for, a party or a, someone wants to have one of those, weigh the jar of jelly beans or something. So you can issue non-commercial invoices. Again, they're very similar. You can construct the totals down here. And then we have the registration invoice. So this is what most counties do every year. They'll generate all these registration invoices. And the main method for generating your registration invoice is actually a batch process, because you don't necessarily want to go through and generate these one by one for every location in the county. So that's where you kind of had a preview. I have this batch invoice function here, which does batch registration invoices. But there are cases during the middle of the year where you may want to issue a sort of a one-off device registration invoice, and that is if you go out to inspect the location and find that they've installed some new devices. You can do a one-off registration invoice for those new devices for that business. So those are the 4 invoice types that we have. And then we have payment receipts. So whenever someone pays something, you can go ahead and put in the invoice number. So this would be this one that I just put in for the $100 fine at 101 Market and Deli. I could say the amount paid would be $100. And I can issue a receipt number. If I have a receipt book and they've paid cash or they've come into the office and paid, I can issue them a receipt number and details about the payment. So, if they paid a credit card, we can say what the credit card type was, but we don't, obviously we're not doing online payments yet. And so we don't want any credit card info in the system. Most of these are going to be cash or check. So for a check, we just put in a check number. And there we go. And that would, if things weren't broken right now, create a payment record that would offset this $100 invoice right here. Okay, so that's kind of the heart of the accounting system. The revenue system is this ledger that keeps track of all the invoices and the payments that are in the system. So talking about the registration process, obviously we want you to do that in a batch mode every year. I haven't counted your locations, but I know you have several hundred of them. So instead of doing those one at a time, we go through this batch process of creating invoices or device registration certificates, or both. You can create them both at the same time. I've generated some invoices here. The way the batch invoice processing goes, so Juliana, when you say you print out all the invoices at the beginning of the year, what you'll do is you'll come to this screen, you'll pick which year you're doing it for. You can either do it for the current or the next fiscal year. And you'll leave it as the default. So you've got your fees version, and I'll come back and talk about fee versions. You have your choice of invoice certificates or invoicing certificates. So you'll be picking invoice. And then it will tell you you have 694 locations that are eligible to get invoices for 21-22. We've already generated 202 because we've got several batches of invoices that we've created down here. So we can generate 492 more invoices. Now, you know, when you get ready to send these to a printer, sending a single file that has 492 invoices in it is probably going to kill your printer. So I generally recommend doing them in smaller batches of 50 or 100.
Okay.
So I just generated 5 this morning, so we can take a look at those 5, or I can generate another, 20. Say, go ahead and generate them. Now, generating a batch of invoices, what it does is it creates a PDF file that has the invoice, the printable invoices in it. That's what you can access from this PDF file link here. It also generates an Excel summary of all the invoicing data that went into those invoices. And that's what you can download here. And it enters the transactions into the transaction ledger. So if I hit generate here, the next 20 business locations that are eligible are going to have the invoice transactions logged on their ledger. Now, if I want to look at what the invoices would look like, but I don't want to actually generate them yet, I can use the trial run button. So let me do that first. I'm going to do 20 businesses and I'll do a trial run. And it will give me a downloadable Excel file up here in my browser downloads. And this is really small, so I'll blow it up just a sec. This is the invoicing summary that it generates. So here are the 20 locations that it would have generated invoices for. And this first tab in the workbook is a summary tab that tells you, here's the device amount for the device registration fee. Here are the late fees. If this were to be a late invoice that we were generating, there would be late fees here. And then you've got the price verification amount and late fee, which is listed separately. Then the DMS administration fee and the invoice total. And then you have the option on your invoices to also include the prior balance due. So if for Redwood Market, their registration fee is $934. If they already owed you a couple of $100, that would show up here, and the amount due would be $1134.
Nice.
Okay, so that's sort of a summary of what each invoice will look like. And then on the details tab, it will give you the actual numbers that go into that invoice. So let's take a look at Redwood Oil. Okay, they have retail motor fuel. They have 40 pumps. The registration fee is $200 per pump. So it's 200. It's $20 per pump. So the fee per end devices is how many devices this fee covers. And then there's no registration fee cap. So some types of devices like scales, if you go to a business that has a ton of scales, you can only bill $1,000 total for all their scales. That's what the registration fee gap is. And I'll talk about this a little bit more. I'll show you the documentation section that describes all of these fees and show you the place where you can edit them. But there is also a location fee of $90 on top of the device registration fee. The location fee is not per vehicle, right? If you look at these LPG meters, these are per vehicle, but obviously for fuel pumps, they're not. And then it's $1.10 admin fee for DMS. And so the totals, you've got $890 in county fees, $44 in DMS admin fees, and $934 is the invoice total. So this is really handy, particularly if a business calls you up and says, I don't understand why this invoice is this much. You can go find their invoice batch, pull up this summary sheet and pull out the records for them and just email them to them and say, these are the calculations that went into your device registration invoice. Let's talk about the invoice format itself. If I look at the PDF file that's generated, this is sort of a generic template that we have. You get it moved over where you can see it. Come on, little thing, move. There we go. So have you had a chance to look at this and it is a Word document, so it's a template that you can modify and customize however you like.
Oh, I can edit it?
Yep. So we can send you the template, or you can generate a Word document, on your own. But each of these locations, like, you're familiar with the mail merge feature in Word?
Yeah. Ish.
Okay. So what we have is we have a list of mail merge fields that you can insert into the document that when we generate the invoice will be replaced with the data in the database. So for example, this is, the business name mail merge field and the business mailing address mail merge fields and the invoice due date and the owner ID and, a list of device types, number of devices. All of these different things have been inserted into this document through those mail merge fields. So if we send you a list of those mail merge fields, if you could, is your current invoice, does it just come out directly from your Access program?
Yes.
Okay. If you're comfortable enough with Word to create a Word document that looks just like that invoice or however you want your invoices to look.
I like your voice. I think it's perfect.
Insert these mail merge fields, then we can take it from there. We'll send you the generic template that we have here, and so you can kind of see how it's constructed, and you can customize it if you want to start that way. The nice thing about this one is if you keep this line in this exact place and this section here in this exact place, this will work with a trifold machine, and this address will show up in the window of a standard number 10 business window envelope.
Oh, nice.
So it makes it easy to fold and stuff.
So as of right now, the invoices just end up looking like that with each individual business invoice.
Yep. So each page is another business. This one is DC Customs. This is ER Energy. This is Express Mart.
So does each location get its own invoice?
Yes.
Okay. So then I would just package those all up and send them all to Thompson Gas instead of Thompson. Because right now, my invoices, I can't put the locations. I can put how many location fees and how many devices, but I can't tell, our invoices don't tell them what locations are being charged for what.
Oh, okay. Well, hopefully this, they'll get more pieces of paper in their envelope, but at least this way they'll, see the more detail on the billing for each location. Not sure if they'll like better or not.
That's our invoices. I don't know if you can really see it, but it just says the location fee, how many, what devices, and how many, and that's it. There's no addresses of the locations. So it was with Access, we had to have one account for every individual location, except for the So
well, with this, on the locations, there's a flag on the location detail screen that says whether the location wants to get the invoice or if they want the invoice sent to headquarters.
That's my favorite part.
Yep. So if you check that flag, then all the locations that have their invoices being sent to headquarters will be printed in sequence, one after the other, so that all the invoices that are going to Thompson Gas will come out one after the other, so you don't have to go searching through the pile of paper for the Thompson Gas invoices.
Exactly. I mean, I love this system that you have.
And then, if there are other locations that want to get the invoices themselves, they'll print out in the order of the location name rather than the owner name. So that should hopefully make that relatively, somewhat easy for you.
So that just brings up a quick question. If one business gets several of these invoices and they only want to send one check, do they have to add them all up themselves and send it in, or?
They will have to add it all up themselves. We don't have a way to combine all the invoices for a business together right now. And if we do that, then we're going to have to come up with some limitations. because there are things like this list of devices that, obviously for Thompson Gas, all they have is LPG meters, but, there's other businesses that list of device types could get pretty long. And so it would kick this over to a second page, and then the format would be kind of messed up and it wouldn't fit the folding machine and the envelope windows anymore. So, it's something we'll consider as a future enhancement, whether we want to let you flag an owner business and say, I want one invoice for all my locations.
Mhm.
When it comes to doing the payment, then it gets a little more important that if they send in one check for a bunch of different invoices, you'll need to enter a payment for each invoice separately. So if they have 5 invoices for $100 and they send you one $500 check, you'll have to enter that as a $100 payment 5 times. You can put the same number on each of the 5 payments, but the system needs to know exactly which invoices are getting paid.
And that's what I currently do now, so it wouldn't be a difference. So, Aaron, some of the big gas stations, like Speedway, they'll take a block of their invoices and they'll send me one check. Like they have like 5 different gas stations, but they'll take 3 and send me a check. But I'll know which invoices they are and where to apply them because of the ID numbers. And that's going to be the difficult part with CalCATS is it doesn't use ID numbers for identification.
Well, there is an ID number. There's a business ID, which is actually the location ID, and then the owner ID, which is the Thompson Gas ID. It's not filled out right now because in this template uses something called the legacy ID. So when you look at your location information screen, there's a legacy ID field.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's not filled out, then this template won't have an ID in there. But we can change that, and you can use the location ID instead, in which case it'll use an internal number that we generate, and there will always be an ID number printed in this business ID. So if they send you back these stubs, there's a couple of different ways you can identify the invoice. One is with the invoice number, and the other is with this business ID number. Let me show you the batch payment screen real quick.
So the legacy ID, I was filling that in as our device IDs, and are those not the two same thing?
The idea of the legacy ID is it should be a unique identifier for each location.
Oh, okay.
Yep, and then that's available in the list of mail merge fields to stick on your invoice. But my recommendation is not to use that one, but instead to use the location ID, because the way the location ID works is if there is a legacy ID value, it'll use that, and if there isn't one, it'll use our internally generated number.
So I thought, so for right now in Access, we have like an ID number here for each person, and so, or each business. And so for the legacy ID, I was putting those numbers in. So that's not what I should be doing?
Well, it depends what you mean by the term business. Take ARCO, for example. Do you have a separate ID for every station, or do you just have one ID for all ARCOs?
For each station, because with Access, you can only have one location per account.
Okay, in that case, you're doing exactly the correct thing. So that unique ID for each, because each location will get a separate invoice. And so if each location has its own ID in that legacy ID field, then that's what will print on your invoice in this business ID.
So the only businesses that don't have separate IDs for their locations are the propane companies, like Thompson Gas. I didn't break them down because they have so many locations. I would just put how many locations they had on the account and how many meters they had on the account. Like say if they had 25 LPG stationary meters and 6 LPG trucks.
So for the Thompson Gas
Then,
locations, you can just leave that legacy ID blank, and
okay,
we'll make sure on your invoice template that where the legacy ID is blank, it'll substitute our internal location ID. So there still will be a unique
okay.
number there for you.
Okay, so CalCATS will generate that?
Yep, generates its own internal identifier for every location that we can use if there's not a legacy ID value that you need to, coordinate with your existing files.
Okay. Yeah, it was, there's so much to learn.
Cool, yeah, and that's why we're all here at the other end of the web meeting, because we're not expecting, and nor do you have to absorb all of this once and then get it right forever after. Got plenty more times. We're happy to talk to you through going through this. And obviously, this isn't something you're going to do for a little while. You do it January, right? Or do you do July?
We do January.
Yeah. So this process we won't have to run it, and for another 8 months. So by the time it comes around to doing it, you'll probably have forgotten some of what we talked about. So we'll just hop on the phone with you again.
Yeah, because I'm trying to update all the records and stuff in our main CalCATS account, and just making sure everything matches, the records are transferred right and the devices are right, and because things are constantly changing all the time with our accounts.
Okay, so let's have a look at what the payment process looks like. The batch payment process it's like the batch invoicing process in that we're expecting you to create a batch of payments and then commit those, and once those are committed, then they generate all the transactions in the ledger and everything else. So each person that's logged in can have their own batch of payments that they're working on. And I'll start a batch of payments, and basically this screen is really designed so that you don't have to reach for the mouse. It'll drop your cursor right into the invoice search, and I can search using that location ID that we talked about, or I can search on invoice number, or I can search on the business name. So I'm going to put in 202, and that'll give me this invoice 202 for that 101 Market and Deli for $248. That's one of the Thompson Gas invoices. So if you have the stubs from the payment, then you can just enter either the invoice number or the location IDs, and it'll find that exact invoice for you. If you don't, if they just sent you a check and you don't know, exactly who it is, then you can put in the location name, and find it either way. Once you have the invoice that you're going to apply the payment to, and this is where if you have a $500 check that's for 5 $100 invoices, you'll just need to keep track, on a little piece of paper or something of the 5 times you're going to enter a $100 payment for that one check. Once I select that invoice, it's going to move the cursor down to the amount paid box, but it also filled in a note, right? If the invoice is paid in full, then press the F key on your keyboard to automatically fill in the payment details. And what it means is each invoice is made up of different amounts, right? There's the device amount, the price verification amount, the late fees, and the DMS fee. And we need to keep track of, if the payment is a partial payment, which pieces of that are being paid, right? So if it's paid in full, then obviously I can just hit the F key and it's going to fill out all the numbers to match what was on the invoice. And you'll notice, it may be a little hard to see, but the payment type drop down is now lit up. So I can just hit the down arrow and go to whatever the payment type was. So if this was a check, I just then hit the tab key, enter the check number, hit the tab key. You're not on a Mac, so you can hit the tab key and hit add payment. Okay, so now I've started a batch of payments, and I've entered this invoice number 202 for $248. And it's put the cursor back up in the invoice box, so I can now go to 203. Okay, so this is the DC Customs invoice. Then again, if it's paid in full, I just hit the F key, down arrow to check, put in the check number, and add the payment to batch. So I can plow through them pretty quickly. Now, if I come on one that is short paid for some reason, right? So if I put in, let's go to 205. So for some reason, you got to check for the ExpressMart invoice, but it was short paid, right? Maybe they paid $200 instead of $248. Then you have to make a decision. How much are you going to apply to each of these different segments? Usually, I think you pay the DMS fee first. So you'd put in 192 here and 8 here. And you'll just check this total paid is what the amount was for. And then you can fill out the rest of it, the check number, add the payment. Okay, so right now I've got 3 payments in my batch. These are not committed yet. These payments are not recorded on those locations ledgers because I'm just working on the batch. And I may want to go take some lunch or, take a break and continue it tomorrow. So I can leave, go log out, do whatever I need to do. When I come back to batch payments, it'll tell me I've got an open batch. I gotta finish this one before I can start another payment batch. So I'll click continue open batch, and then I can add some more payments to here. So that way, if you get 200 checks in a day and it's towards the end of the day, you're going to start that night and then finish it the next morning. No problem. The key thing here is we want to make it easy for you to reconcile your payment entries in CalCATS with most counties have some process where they put all of the payments, checks, cash, and what credit card slips and whatnot into a deposit bag and take it down to Treasury to deposit in the bank. And so you'll get a receipt from Treasury or from audit or whoever handles your payments that says we got this much in this bag, so that you can have that to reconcile against the total amount in your payment batch. And then, there's a second reconciliation with the actual bank deposit. So once it goes into the account, someone in Treasury should be getting that bank deposit and comparing that to the deposit receipt they gave you. So that's why we got this kind of batch thing. And if you do stretch a batch over a couple of days, just try and keep all the actual payment, the currency or checks or whatever that go into this batch as one, deposit you take over to Treasury. If I need to edit any of these, I can click on them and it'll take me back up into this row, or I can delete a payment out of here and re-enter it if I need to. When I'm done, I'm good to go. These 3 payments are good. I'm done with my batch. That's all we got today. I'll click this close batch button. And that'll say this is actually going to apply all the payments in the current batch. That means those, as soon as I hit OK here, those transaction ledgers will be updated with those payment records. And I'll see, here are all the batches I've entered, and it'll keep track of all the batches you enter, until you start purging records because of, records retention rules. And at any time I can, if I messed up and I need to reopen that batch, I can reopen it here. Or I can click this calculator button. That'll give me what we call the payment batch report. So that's another Excel file that has all the details of that payment batch in it. So it's got who entered it, when they entered it, what the status is, and then all the payment details and the number of payments in the batch total. So that's what you would reconcile with your Treasury deposit.
Nice.
Okay, so let's go have a look at our transaction ledger again. I'll go to 101 Market. So now you'll see we had these invoices and we had the payment, and I'm back down to an account balance of $100, which is that $100 fine invoice that I entered earlier in this little demo. So let's say something untoward happens. The payment goes in, but the check bounces, right? So if a check bounces, you're going to go to the transaction ledger for that business. You're going to click on that payment record, and you're going to hit this delete button. Okay, so when I delete a button, it's going to say, do you want to delete this payment? This will enter a reversing transaction, and it will cancel out that payment. So I'll say yes. Now, the reason for the reversal is check bounced. So now what you're going to see is in their ledger, they've got the original invoice, then they've got the payment, and then they've got the reversal of the payment.
Oh, okay.
So as far as the auditors are concerned, the record of that payment being registered in the system is never gone. It's just that now we have a record saying that that payment was reversed due to payment cancellation. And if I look in the audit log, it'll show that reason I put in because the check bounced. So now their balance is back up to 348, and I can now go issue a new invoice for them, which would be their registration invoice plus whatever the bounce check fee is. Okay, so that's our payments process. Last thing I'll take a look at here is our certificates. This is something that you don't do, but I'm going to just show you a couple. So if you were to decide you wanted to start issuing certificates, most counties actually require businesses to post these, somewhere visible in the store. But this is what our device registration certificate template looks like. They're designed to print 3 up on a page so that you can use a triplicate cutter. The county seal, the validity period, who they are, and this is just like the invoice, where this is a Word document and you can use the mail merge fields to put some more information on here if you want to. Okay, so that's not all that relevant to you because you don't do that, but just so you know, there is a way to do that in the system if you ever wanted to start issuing those certificates to companies.